So welcome, this is Unit 1, Module 3, Lesson 2, using the console to debug some common errors. So we're going to look at the syntax errors that we talked about, and we're going to talk about how to use the console to figure out how to fix those errors and where they are. So I have some code that we're going to look at in our console. There are mistakes in this, and we're going to use our console to try to figure out what's going on. So if I go into EarSketch, and I run this little bit of code here, you can see that I get some errors. So the first error is right here. It says parse error. There's an error when reading the code, bad input line 9. And it highlights for us where the error is in the code. So we would then go ahead and try to figure out what is wrong with our statement. So this is the statement that we're looking at, and we're trying to figure out what's wrong with it. If you look really closely, you'll see that we don't have a comma here. There should be a comma between the name of the song, the track, the starting measure, and the ending measure, and we're missing a comma here. So we would go back into EarSketch, we'd put in our comma, and then we try to run it again. And we're still getting the same error. So error message, parse error, there's an error reading the code, bad input on line 9. So there's still something wrong with line 9. So we would then go and we look a little bit further, and we might notice that fit media is not correct. Fit media should be FIT with a capital M. So we'd go into EarSketch and we would change that so it's fit media with a capital M. We try to run it again. And it looks like we still have one other error. Well, it looks like everything's okay in this line. Fit media is right. We have the name of the song there. We have all our commas. It doesn't look like there's going to be anything else wrong, but it still says there's some type of parse error. Well, this is a problem inside of all programming languages, that the computer tries to figure out where the mistake is and gives you the closest spot that it's first finding the mistake. And it turns out that's not where the error is in this case. The error is not really on line 9, but that's when the computer first sees the error, and I'll explain in detail. The error is actually on line 7. So what's happening here is in line 7 we set the tempo and we open the parentheses, but we don't close the parentheses. So as far as the computer is concerned, all of this is still part of set tempo. And we close the parentheses here for the end of set tempo. So the error is actually on line 9, but the error is really calling back to here, line 7. That's where our mistake is. So we have to end up going ahead and fix that mistake. So if we go into EarSketch and actually fix this error, and run it again, we can see that we now don't have the error here on line 7 or line 9 anymore. That error has been fixed, but we still got an error. Finish is missing. So if we look down at line 10, finish, it looks like we have it there. Well, it turns out finish is supposed to have parentheses after it. We can see that our version of finish doesn't have the parentheses. So we want to make sure that we go back and put those parentheses in, because Python doesn't recognize this as a command unless the parentheses are there. It's really picky about that. So we'll go back into EarSketch and put in our parentheses, and we'll try to run it one more time. And now we finally have some music. And it looks like we are all good to go. I don't know if you heard that. Let me try that again. There we go. So we have our music playing. So that's the process of debugging. So what we're going to do next is take a look at some common errors that we might find inside of Python, and the compiler errors, or the errors that show up in the console that we can look at. You have this to reference from, so you should use this whenever you get errors to try to figure out what the error is and how to fix it. So let's take a look at that. The first error is called an import error. Now, an import error occurs when you have not imported the appropriate package, but it could be because you didn't spell it correctly. So for example, if you're importing EarSketch, we want this to be all lowercase, not capital. So you have to make sure that you have correctly spelled your imported module correctly, otherwise it won't find it. Or if you're trying to use a command for a module that you haven't imported, you'll get this error as well. So making sure that you've imported all the proper packages and they're spelled correctly in your Python programs will help you eliminate this error. So this error we haven't talked much about yet, but we haven't really had a reason to. But it's something called an indentation error. In Python, unlike many other languages, the way you indent changes what the code means and what it does. There are some structures that require the same level of indentation all the way throughout. So in this structure here, we have a for loop, and everything underneath that for loop must be indented the same amount. So you can see this right here. The MA is not lined underneath the M here, and that's going to cause an error. The other choice would be to go all the way back here against the original line. So we can't be in between like this. It has to either be indented or not indented. So properly indenting is very important. This is what it should have looked like when it's properly done. So try deleting excess spaces in front of your code and make sure that each line segment is against the left edge of the code. Then indent the body line by line, making sure that all the indentation is consistent. This next error is what's called an index error, and this can happen in several different instances. We could have a string where we're trying to print the string and we are out of range of that string. In other words, maybe we look past the end of the string. Another example is when you have your sound clip, but you forgot that you're supposed to start at 0 and you start somewhere else. So it's important that you have your index set up properly. In this case, we're looking at an array, or list I should say, and the list is numbered 0, 1, 2, and here we have it numbered 1, 2, 3, and that's not correct. What we want to do is label it as 0, 1, 2, and then that would be correct. So here in this case, we're going to get the error, the index error, because we're pointing to something that doesn't exist, namely index 3. Here, we have all the indexing correct. So the solution is to write down the name of each clip in your list and label each with the associated index starting at 0. And this helps you understand the structure of the list and what may be causing an error at the index error. So this next error is called a name error. This is when you have not defined a variable or defined a function. Now it may be that you actually defined it, but you have spelled it wrong or the capitalization is wrong. So sometimes you have to really look to see where this mistake is. If we look at this code here, we have today is equal to read input what day is it, and then we say print today, and that kind of looks okay, but really the variable containing the string to be concatenated was not referred to by the correct name. A lowercase t should have been used. So if we look very carefully, we can see that this has a lowercase t and this has an uppercase t, so they're not recognized. So we have to go ahead and fix that so the t is correct in both spots. So the solution is to check spelling and make sure the case of your variables and functions are the same, and make sure when you're using a variable or calling a function that each has been defined properly and previously before you use it. Make sure you define a function before it is called. Although you can paste the names in directly, ensure that your sound constant names align with the clip names in the sound browser. Also, be careful of autocorrect. Sometimes it'll capitalize something when you don't expect it to if you're using some type of third-party editor. So parse error, we've seen this a couple times. This is some type of error when reading the code. In other words, the interpreter is unable to convert your code into something the computer can understand. So it's really just lost. This is the I throw my hands up and I don't know what you want me to do. It could be something as simple as a misspelling. It could be something as a misplaced comma for an argument. We saw this a couple times. If we look at this code here, we get a line 26 error, and the line looks fine, but directly above it is this select random file, which, don't worry too much about it. but the function's missing the closing parentheses. So it can't figure out what is actually supposed to be going on. So right here, we can see that there's no closing parentheses. And we saw that earlier with the tempo error when we looked at the code in the example. So just by putting that parentheses in, we fix the code. So the solution, check the console for an indication of where the offending line might be, but then make sure you're looking above that and make sure all function definition calls are defined and everything is properly opened and closed. Make sure you're not having any extra punctuation. Make sure you're not missing any function definitions and arguments. And finally, check the spelling to make sure everything is spelled correctly for your arguments. Okay, a syntax error is a little bit different than a parse error. A syntax error occurs when a program encounters a mistake in the script's syntax, the rule of the language. So if we look at this following example here, it's supposed to create some dynamically changing futuristic beeps, but however, it contains two common bugs. So the first bug is that we've forgotten to end the if statement with a colon. So all if statements and for statements have to end with a colon. That's not a spelling mistake. It's really more of a punctuation mistake. So it becomes a syntax error or a structure error. So we can fix this by adding in our colon at the end of our if statement. So often this is going to be some type of punctuation mistake that you've made. Maybe you're missing a colon or you've forgotten to end some type of structure. There's some type of structure mistake here. So always check the console and editor for clues. Beyond the common errors above, check for opening and closing quotation marks, and make sure you're not using Python keywords as variable names. Like if you used set tempo as a variable name, you could end up with a syntax error because Python gets confused. So type error. This is when you try to put a type of one thing, a data type of one thing, into something else. So if it's expecting an int and you send it a string, Python's not going to be really happy, or vice versa. So you have to make sure that the types match. So if we look at this code right here, we get a type error because the number type cannot be concatenated into a string. We're trying to put the number type with a string, so it doesn't work. Instead, we can use a data type conversion to first convert this into a string. And if we look at that, with the command is right here, str, measure total, will convert that into a string. Now, other languages actually don't have a problem with concatenating numbers with strings, like Java, but Python definitely does have a problem. It will not let you take a string and put it with a number with another string. It won't let you do that because it's just confused. So that's the kind of type error that you might see. Solution, make sure all your data types match. Make sure everything is lined up, and it's usually very specific. Python or your sketch will tell you exactly the line that it's seeing the data number. This one is usually pretty easy error to find. So we haven't really looked at the command that might produce this error yet, but we're going to go through all of them. This is when you're sending an argument into some type of method call or function call, and the argument is the right type, but when the function tries to carry out your argument, it runs into an error because the value that you're sending is not right. It doesn't fit what it expects. And there's a way of setting up rhythms inside of your sketch. And here they have something called beat string. And they have in their beats right here. But the problem here is that for make beat, the argument needs to be one of the index values must be accessed as invalid. In this scenario, it's likely the program forgot that the list indexes start at 0. So that's the issue, that he didn't start at 0. And we'll talk more about make beat function when we get to it. But it's one of those times where everything's kind of the right type, but you just didn't format things correctly for this function to function properly or work properly. So here's the solution here. They put in the zeros rather than the ones because it's supposed to start at a 0, not a 1. So make sure your arguments for your functions are all correct and match what format is expected. Okay, so now it's your turn. Do the practice assignment. Let's use the knowledge that we've learned of the common errors to try to debug this code. Try to find out where the mistakes are. Feel free to use the editor. There's 2 examples that you need to do, error 1 and error 2. There may be more than one error, so run it and see if you can fix all of the problems with this code, and then submit the correct code for both scripts inside of the written solutions. Okay, or even just submit where the mistake is would be fine. Just writing that out in words rather than just pasting everything. Just write out where the mistake is and what you did to fix it. Be careful, some of them are a little tricky. Good luck, and never stop coding.